Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining this session. This panel is called Shades of Green. Why we called this panel Shades of Green? We thought for a while about what to call it, and we realized actually that we were kind of defining it by what we're not talking about. So what are we not talking about? We're not talking in this session about carbon markets because we didn't feel that they fit within our understanding of how climate change is impacting low-income communities. We're also not talking about renewable energy and pay-go solar, even though those are topics you might expect to see in a green inclusive finance session like this, because we feel that they are mostly talking about mitigation, and we are much more interested at CFI on understanding financial services in resilience and adaptation. We're also not talking about climate smart agriculture and smallholder agriculture more broadly, because we think that you probably already understand that as part of green. So what are we going to talk about? At CFI, we're thinking about green much more broadly, and we're thinking about different population groups that are highly vulnerable to climate change and that need financial services and financial systems to help them to build resilience and adapt to negative impacts of climate change that they're already seeing and are going to continue to face into the future. So that's not just thinking about smallholder farmers, even though they're probably the largest group that will suffer, but we're thinking about coastal and river communities who are suffering from sea level rise, coastal erosion, salinization, destruction of fishing stocks, destruction of coastal ecosystems, and coastal livelihoods. We're thinking about the urban poor, in particular poor urban women who are managing households and having to adapt to extreme weather conditions on top of the range of challenges they're already facing in poverty. And we're also thinking even more broadly about refugees, forcibly displaced people, forcibly displaced by factors that include and are exacerbated by climate change. That's what we call a second or third order impact of climate change. But when we at CFI talk about thinking about climate change more broadly, these are the things we want to bring into the conversation. And finally, we want to think about the overlapping nature of climate crises and how a lot of countries are experiencing all of these crises, all of these challenges at the same time. Last year, Mozambique was the most climate vulnerable country in the world and faces cyclones and droughts and extreme temperatures and a range of second and third order conditions as well, including forced migration. So we wanted to bring, and there's so many other things we could have brought into this conversation, but what we want to do in this session is make the point that green inclusive finance and the role of us as inclusive finance practitioners goes a lot further and is a lot bigger than we traditionally might have thought about. So I'm just going to briefly introduce our panel now, and hopefully it will become clear why we asked all these people to talk, and then I'll shut up, as I think you're mostly here to listen to them anyway. But first of all, we're going to speak with Bijal Brahmbhatt. She's Executive Director of Mahila Housing Sewa Trust, which is a women's empowerment organization and microfinance institution based in Ahmedabad and Gujarat. All of the time that I was in India, they were one of the MFIs that really stood out to me as one of the most innovative and forward-thinking and people-focused organizations serving low-income communities, particularly at the forefront of climate change. And we're going to speak with Bijal about what that really entails. Secondly, we're going to speak with Carlos Orango, who's Director of Economic Resilience at RARE and their Fish Forever program. It's a global nonprofit that works with small-scale fishing communities to develop coastal livelihoods and community-led financial inclusion approaches for fishing communities. And Carlos leads their financial inclusion initiatives. Mikkel works at UNHCR, working with refugees, forcibly displaced people around the world, and she'll help us understand the impact of climate change there. And finally, Benedito, who a lot of you will know. Benedito works at, he's an investment manager at FSD Mozambique. A lot of you will know FSD Mozambique, and Benedito also led the FSD Network's Green Finance Steering Committee. A lot of different wide-ranging perspectives. When I introduced the concept of this panel to each of these people, each of the panelists, I think it took a while to understand why we were bringing these people together into this one panel, and I hope that that does become clear. So I'd like to start, Bijal, talking to you about your work in Ahmedabad and Gujarat more broadly. Thinking of the customers and the people that you work with, low-income women and their communities. How do you see climate change impacting their lives, their livelihoods, including their incomes and their expenditures?
Yeah, so as you already said, we work with poor women in the informal sector, largely in urban areas. And so the informal sector would compromise across the global south, India, Nepal, Bangladesh. Women who are working as home-based workers, using their homes as workers. Also outdoor workers like construction workers, women working as laborers there. And then, of course, several other trades in the informal sector, also selling their services, etc. So we saw that we of course do work with them in the case of disasters, but we saw that as climate change the impacts were increasing in urban areas, heat was a big, slow onset but potent disaster. And so was, waterlogging. So whenever there was little bit of rain, it was probably not getting flooded that very easily, but it used to get waterlogged and it used to stay for days and days. And that was really having a toll on their incomes. So for example, when the heat used to increase, there was a lot of heat strokes. So and due to the heat strokes, women used to get hospitalized. Again, during the heat season, their work hours reduced quite a lot, even though they were working from homes, because their homes are actually so vulnerable because they live in shanties, and the kind of material that they use for their roofing and their housing really actually, increases the heat much more because of lack of ventilation from the outside. And so their working productivity also decreases by almost half to what it is in the in the normal season. So dual care also increases because people fall ill, and so care work. So 53% of the women, we have done small surveys, and we realized that 53% of our women members say that their care work also increases, which means it takes away time from their economic productive working hours. So we, and in the case of say waterlogging or flooding, when it happens, we also used to work in areas which used to get extensively flooded across India. And just to give you a very gender example, everyone used to climb on top of their houses to be able to survive. The ones who got down first were women when the waters receded, and actually the mortality rate of the women increased so much simply because the houses were all filled with muck, and then when they were the ones who were cleaning the muck, and the men would come down later, and there were snake bites. There were so many snakes. So 84% of the women that we work with said that they were impacted due to heat, due to waterlogging and flooding. Heat also, actually meant doubling of, expenditure. So while you have a loss, you also have an increased expenditure in your electricity bills, which almost double in your health expenditures. During flooding, transportation cost was very high because as compared to earlier, because you really needed to navigate the flooded areas to reach your workplace if you were working outside. So those costs were very high. So loss of income actually amounted to, on an average, $33. So they had an average income of $275 per month, of which $33 during the heat season was spent as a loss of, so the loss of income was $33. And during flooding, it was very, very heavy, like $112. So that's the kind of condition that our women are living and working in.
Thanks, Bijal. That's fascinating and so great to get the data from your focus groups and hear the stories from this about to add on to the narrative that we have. Carlos, I want to ask you a similar question. You work with very different populations, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the populations you work with and how you see climate change impacting their livelihoods.
Thank you, Howard, and thank you all for being here and for giving me the opportunity to talk to all of you. So the population we work with, they are basically what we call small-scale fishers. They work in normally remote, isolated communities, sometimes accessible by boat or difficult to access. They use for fishing. Normally, they are in debt with the first buyer of the supply chain. And what it's been happening, and we've been seeing this over and over as we run surveys in the communities, is that first of all, fishing is a very unpredictable profession. So even in the absence of climate change, fishing is very, very unpredictable. So they go out fishing, sometimes even days, and they don't know if they're going to come back with fish. One thing we've seen across communities around the world in a small scale, the same type of communities, is that they have ancient knowledge and they know where that coral reef is. So they can go around and fish in that coral reef. They also know where that seagrass is, and they can go and get different types of fish. That is being totally devastating by climate change. That ancient knowledge of where the fish moves and how the fish, moves from one side to another, where does it spawn, and where those kind of their fishing grounds for fish, they all have been changing. So effectively, these communities are not only reducing their income, but also their nutritious intake because they depend on fish. So the thing we're doing here is trying to work with communities to see if through adaptation and mitigation of this climate impact, climate change effects, the fish population will come back. And we have to work against, all these effects, that it's acidification of the ocean, which is impacting the coral reefs, and raising levels of the ocean, which is impacting also the mangroves. And the ocean, the temperature is rising, so the seagrass has been affecting. So against this background, we need to stabilize the ecosystem biologically, so they can actually benefit from it. In terms of gender, because we work a lot with women, so the traditional way of thinking about this is that men fish and women do the processing. But we have also seen that because fishing is scarce right now, women are out there fishing, and this is changing a lot of the dynamics also in the fishery. So this is sort of in a nutshell, big characteristics of the population we work with. Same, we run surveys all the time, and what we have seen is fishers normally, they used to in the past, and when I'm saying the past, this is changing so rapidly, right? Again, COVID and stuff. So before 5-6 years ago, they used to claim that falling eel was one of the main reasons for them to lose income, or that they are fishing. Lately, we have seen more that adapting towards rapidly changing climate, it's what it's making them lose income. So we're seeing that more and more and more. So for us, it's all about restoring, that coral reef, that seagrass, that mangrove that will serve as a natural barrier against rising tides and all of it. So yeah, that's the population we work with across the tropics in the global tropics.
Thanks, Carlos. And we're going to come on to a bit later about the, given these set of challenges, what's the role of financial services and financial systems. But Benedito, we can move on to you now. I mean, as I said, in Mozambique, Mozambique faces so many climate-related challenges. I think it was the most climate vulnerable country in the world last year. We saw the effects of cyclones Idai and Kenneth a couple of years ago, but also droughts, changing precipitation patterns. Within your work at FSD Mozambique and with your broader colleagues across the FSD network, how do you see climate change impacting various low-income and vulnerable groups within Mozambique?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. That's an interesting question. Let me start by saying I have seen almost all of the impacts that you did mention. Just to give you an interesting figure, in the last 60 years, we had around 70 disasters, which impacted or affected around 30 million Mozambicans, and also with negative impact on development. So in terms of impacts, I would like to highlight, you mentioned Idai as one of the biggest situations that we have here. In terms of impact, I would say that the smallholder farmers were the ones who really had a large impact. And this was either through slow changes like raising temperature, but also as the situation that we were trying to describe now. In fact, there are around 2.5 million people in need of a humanitarian assistance because of this situation of Idai and Kenneth. And largely the agriculture was the sector most affected. As in our case, around 70% of population depend on climate sensitive agriculture. It's mainly rain feed agriculture. We see likely impacted by changes in climate change, and also the impact of agriculture is huge. For example, 25% of GDP and also around 7% of labor force, meaning that also around 90% of the poor are primarily engaged in agriculture. So there are different factors in which we can really see the huge impact of these cyclones mainly in the people related to agricultural activities. And the other groups affected, of course, are women, very young people, the elder people also with disability, mainly people which have challenges in terms of ability to respond to these changes in terms of climate, and also the people with the challenge in terms of management risks and strategic tools to cope with this situation. Another group also affected MSMEs. Normally when this situation does occur, normally they have a situation in which their assets are somehow destroyed, which causes damages in terms of their main source of livelihood activities. So this will be, the way we saw this, it should be seen as an integrated approach in order to make sure that we can combine an integrated approach combining different entities, coordinating efforts to make sure that we can touch issues around climate mitigation, as well as climate adaptation, and of course with climate finance should be available to make sure that we can then implement these plans, recovery, and we can also make sure that we can see how then financial sector can assist on that. So I was just bringing some highlights about the impact, and later on we can discuss on how financial sector can better assist this. So I will pause for now in terms of what will be the impact. We could have more time to kind of describe the impacts, but just generally give me some idea. Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you,
thank you, Benedito. I'm going to move now to Mikkel. I hope it's okay for me to say Mikkel. When I first started talking to Mikkel about joining this panel and explained what we wanted to cover, initially she said she didn't see that she had that much to contribute to it, because this idea of bringing together, financial inclusion and refugees and climate change, these three massive topics, is such a complex and new area of work. There's people bringing together refugees and forcibly displaced people and financial inclusion, like Mikkel. There's people, and they're also bringing together climate change and refugee populations. But bringing these three things together, it's relatively new. And I think, and Mikkel said she wasn't quite sure that she had enough to add to the conversation. And so I had to convince her that, this was, it was something that we wanted to talk about as CFI. And as an industry, I think we need to talk about more. And so I'm really glad that she did join the panel, because, leading UNHCR's work in these areas of financial inclusion, I think, and with climate change coming as both a driver and an exacerbator of refugee and forced displacement crises, it's something that we need to talk about more. So Mikkel, thank you for joining. And maybe you can just start by talking a little bit about the work that you and UNHCR have been doing and thinking about how is climate change causing and impacting forced displacement around the world?
Yeah, thank you, Howard. And actually, I must say that I'm very happy to join in the panel. So thank you for the invite. It's a great opportunity to learn from colleagues here in the finance space, but also, as you were pointing out, to give the opportunity to talk about how climate change is impacting displacement. And although there isn't much yet done to link up access to financial services for this population and climate change, there is actually a huge opportunity there. So this is, I think, what we can really talk about today, and I hope I can give you some interesting insights. So, first of all, climate change is increasingly becoming a major driver of displacement. Each year, just to give you some figures, over 25 million people are forced to move due to disaster-related causes. And this is based on the calculation of the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. There is also a high agreement among scientists that the effects of climate change, in combination with other factors I will mention in a second, will increase the displacement of people over the next decades. The World Bank estimates that more than 200 million people could migrate due to climate change by 2050. With most of the movement actually occurring within countries. So we're really talking about mostly internally displacement, but there are also refugees number. So how does climate change impact displacement? First of all, we heard there are sudden onset natural hazards such as cyclones, coastal floods, and people just may lose everything. And those living in communities that cannot cope with their own resources are often just forced to move, usually internally, as I said, or sometimes also crossing borders. So just one severe weather event can eliminate the livelihoods of an entire poor rural community, as we were hearing just now. There are also the slow onset hazards, such as the prolonged droughts, the desertification, and here people see their livelihoods threatened because their crops and livestock struggle just to survive, where it's too hot and dry or too cold and wet. And so also these events force people to migrate. But the impacts of climate change may further act as a threat multiplier that exacerbates the potential for conflict over scarce resources and consequent displacement. We have here a colleague from Mozambique, and it's one of the countries that's actually affected by this threat multiplier, and the competition between the population of the majority of the vulnerable states is often to seek control over water. So we're not really talking about diamonds or oil. We're really talking about water becoming scarcer and people competing for food. And the worst food crisis recently were linked to both climate change impact and conflict. And just to give some other number, the adverse effect of climate change tend to hit the hardest those who have already been displaced by conflict. So 70% of the internally displaced people who have fled conflict and violence, and 40% of refugees currently live and are hosted in highly climate vulnerable countries. And so these people can be forced to move again when a disaster occurs, or because just their living areas have become inhospitable. So you really see the size of the problem. And again, we heard from Mozambique. I can give other examples. We observed in UNHCR in Yemen, for example, 2020, there have been devastating floods and storms with 200,000 new displacements. These were more than the numbers triggered by the fighting in the country. And many of those already forced to migrate because of weather events had been already displaced by the conflict. So again, repeated displacement, which exacerbate the cycle of poverty. And climate change creates also, as I was saying, it mostly creates internal displacement before it reaches a level where people are forced to cross borders, so essentially becoming refugees. However, we are witnessing increasing situation where people may also have a valid claim for refugee status, whereas the climate emergency exacerbates the unstable and fragile situations. And so this is the situation of the Sahel, which is really one of the fastest growing displacement crises in the world. There have been over 3 million people who have been forced to flee within countries and across their borders. And the region is also experiencing a massive increase in the population. At the same time, there is a decrease of the productivity of the land. And so fragile settings, this can trigger new conflict and that can trigger new displacement. And this is the reality and the future we are dealing with. So really learning how to address overlapping conflict and disaster displacement is really becoming a major challenge. And I do think, and this is why this panel was set up, is that finance definitely has an important role to play to help this population be better prepared when natural hazards hit and better adapt, respond, and prevent forcibly displacement.
Thanks, Mikkel. That's great. I'm very glad you did join. It's been fascinating to hear from all four of you. I've just been making notes and I've written down more than 20 different climate-related challenges that have been discussed already. And obviously, you know, we're very aware as a financial inclusion think tank that there are things that inclusive finance can do, and there's things that inclusive finance can't do. And we want to be part of solutions, we want to be part of approaches, and we want to help enable resilience and adaptation, conscious that there's a lot more that needs to be done. But if we can just talk a bit about what is already being done, because I think this is what we try, one of the things we want to do at CFI is highlight the approaches that are currently being taken and offer some opportunities and hope for what inclusive finance can do. So maybe we go back to you, Bijal, because I know that at MHT you've already come up with, I can think of 3 or 4 great financial products aimed at low-income women that help them deal with some of the challenges that you talked about. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about the products that you offer that help these women manage the risks associated with climate change.
Yeah. So when we actually started working with the women on climate issues, we realized that, for them, it was merely God's act. So, and because they were so poor, their lives were really concentrated on short-term issues like, where will I get my next meal from, or, my child's education. And that is what occupied their mind space, as well as, the shortage of money was also very evident that they may not be able to invest in such areas without education on what was happening. what really got them interested, because climate change to them was really abstract. We were talking of slow but potent disaster, like heat. And so we really started education on climate change adaptation and resilience. And then one approach was that we also started looking at technologies and design options for housing, So for example, there were several cool roof technologies that we would pilot. And then on the same hand, we would also help women assess their vulnerabilities in terms of heat. We would also, pilot this cool roof technologies. We trained the women to read the temperature loggers that were put into their house and compare it to the readings taken by the Indian meteorological, the forecast by the Indian meteorological department. And they really learned that the technology was working. To us, the acid test was that when the women will invest into buying these technologies, probably that's when they, had started accepting the technologies beyond, something that is, merely grant funded and sort of stays on a project basis with an organization like us. So we, and then we realized that it worked, and some of the women actually took 100% loans for cool roofs. There were several but we also were getting educated. So there were several technologies that we deployed, but the technology for which they took 100% loan. So they came up with various, financial things like, part contributions, part subsidy, and then complete loans. But the technology for which they took a complete loan was one which was easily accessible, not only affordable, but also aspirational. So which used to look glamorous and which was adopted by, probably some other middle class people, just to show that, that was the pathway towards coming out of poverty. So it was, affordable, aspirational, user-friendly and easily accessible, kind of a cool roof technology that they took a complete loan for. And we also realized that, women did have a savings habit, and, that really helped them to sort of, go through times like COVID or other times when disaster, hit them. So, they would withdraw all the savings, or probably at times also take a loan to, redo their housing because the disaster had hit them or flooding had hit them. So looking at that, we also started working on the concept of insurance. And it's not a very easy concept because, even in India, even the entire insurance coverage in India is only 7%, considering the educated also. So here, and maximum coverage was done actually for life and for health. And we were talking of abstract things like heat insurance or excessive rain insurance that was not linked to agriculture. And so we started working on those issues. The heat and excessive rain insurance is yet to get piloted. We are at the design stage. But women have expressed willingness to pay a certain level of premium. But we are still being faced with challenges like, women still think of insurance as a benefit. So whatever that they invest into the insurance premium, they don't consider it as a risk transfer, but they keep asking, will I get back my money? So they think of it as a benefit. So I think that concept of, that it's a risk transfer and you may not necessarily get the benefit in terms of money going back is something that we have to educate them a lot around. Also, the other thing was that we are also trying to look at whether we can work out an endowment product. So a product which actually, if your payout doesn't trigger, then goes back to you over a period of time. Insurance companies do have endowment products for life and other, areas. So let us see, we are working on that. We have been successful in certain areas with complete financial loans. And we are also working, and we do rely on the savings habit of these poor women. We we do think and we are hopeful that looking at the savings habit that they have, they will consider paying a premium for insurance with adequate education and the kind of impact that we show them. And probably we will be able to design a product. I know for sure that it will have to get, once we pilot it, it will have to be refined again and again and again based on the needs. So success is not going to come at the first go, but we do hope to keep evolving over a period of time, because we have credit cooperatives as our financial arm, and they are not very heavily regulated by the government, and that allows us to experiment and innovate. So we are hopeful, yeah.
Thanks, Bijal. And it's been fascinating for me to learn about particularly the extreme heat index insurance. You know, I agree that it's something that we'll probably need to iterate, but I think the learnings from that for other parts of the world can be hugely significant. I think a lot of us are kind of seeing how that works out. So thank you. Carlos, you talked about a lot of climate-related issues, some of which I think financial services can play a role in, and some that maybe just be too big. But from your perspective, what do you see as the main roles of both financial products and financial systems in helping those communities manage those challenges?
Thank you, Howard. Well, for us, it's critical because we found the connection that the lack of financial inclusion actually somehow leads to overfishing. And overfishing, it's causing a lot of the issues in the ecosystem where we work. So for us, it's very important to be able to align timeframes for both the financial sort of ecosystem and the individual needs for financial services. So the population we work with, as I said before, majority of the fishers receive most, if not all, of their financial services from the first buyer in the community. This relationship, for whatever difficult for us to understand, it's critical for the well-being of the community. So for us, it's not, or for any organization, it's not like you can go and break that relationship between fishers and first buyer, because that's critical for the well-being of the community. So, but the way it works is that fishers, they don't really know the price of the loans they are taking, or somehow the insurance they have, or sometimes they lease their boats from the first buyer. So because the terms of those financial services are not clear in most of the times, it resorts eventually to overfishing, because the first buyer is going to claim their payback in fish, not in cash. So one of the things we found throughout these years of doing this is that it creates so many problems. One, it's biological, because that catch is unreported. And that we found that the unreported catch is about the same size of the reported catch around the world. That means we're depleting fish out of the ocean at twice the speed we thought. So that's something there. So what we need to actually, or we've been doing, is we've been providing options, really, because there is a limit for the capital the first buyer in the community can provide to fishers. So we're providing options little by little, because we also, the population we work with, they are they don't have IDs, so it's difficult for them to register against any database. So we provide some sort of IDs for buyers and fishers, and we have an app that it's used by buyers. So we actually, in fact, we replace the paper ledger the buyers keep to know who they're buying from, for a digital ledger that they can record their transactions. So we effectively are creating digital transactions between both fishers and buyers that then we can use to provide financial literacy and education and create small and basic financial statements for them. So that's one of the things we're using. Then we use savings clubs also as a way for the communities to realize they have some power in saving, some disposable money, and then we slowly graduate them to acquisition of financial services. For us is the day-to-day, it's very difficult to manage, but what we've seen is when there is a shock or an emergency, for instance, in Mozambique, now we're talking 2021, the cyclone Eloise hit a city called Beira, and we have sites around the city. And we've been working with local governments for a long time to try to get some sort of microinsurance and also parametric insurance that it could be paid by local governments. So the cost of rebuilding the community won't be as high for local governments. And they didn't hear, and they didn't want to hear after the cyclone hit, right? So now we're in these conversations trying to also work with local governments, because as Howard pointed, some of these solutions are too big or for the individual to take on, and they have to be community-driven solutions. And one things we've seen is out of the community, the savings clubs, a portion of the savings can be allocated towards paying for some sort of index-based insurance, so the community feels they are chipping in for their own protection. So we've seen this type of financial products being very well received by communities around the world. Savings, for sure, number one is the building, the bricks, the builds, the foundation kind of life. But what a small fisher needs versus what the ecosystem, the financial ecosystem, has to offer, because they normally need such a short-term loans, days or less than a week, that it's expensive for the financial service to just underwrite a loan and provide. So we eventually have to resort to technology. I mean, and what we are doing now is we're focusing a lot in creating digital identities, financial digital identities that we can then bring and connect to financial service providers. So for some of the community members that before didn't have any records of their transactions, now we can provide some through the use of apps. We know, for instance, for the household, if we do some research, of course, with the people letting us do it, we can understand better the proportion of the income in the household now, because we know the income from fishing. We also know the income from processing. We also have some information from the savings, which is being part of the savings clubs. And then we talk to local financial institutions or global, whatever we need to talk to try to align those operations, and it's working. I mean, it's a slow process, as you can imagine, because in most of the communities where we work, there is no online connectivity. So we need to make the apps work offline and create all these financial identities, and then bring these to a central database that we can organize, and then feed back through a portal for them to enter and access. So that's where we're. But for us, having an inclusive coastal community, financially inclusive coastal community, is critical for their long-term survival. Even just for them to get those transfers from the government after a cyclone, just for those little, because everything helps after these sort of emergencies we face.
Thanks, Carlos. That's really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Benedito, I'll come back to you. So, you work with a lot of financial institutions in Mozambique. What would you like to see them do better? Do you think they have the capacity? Do you think they need the know-how, the resources? What do they need to help them fulfill their role in resilience and adaptation? And also, as FSD Moz channeling development funding, what do you think the development sector can do to support them?
Yeah. Again, this is an interesting question and very challenging. Actually, as a facilitator, as a market facilitator, we would like to see financial sector better integrating the climate issues on their financial ecosystem. We also are working hard in that direction. We would like to see green thinking be more broadly, part of the financial sector development. And for that, we recognize that there are some challenges, and we have agreed to first of all to kind of design a roadmap which results from a landscape assessment that we conduct in green finance, in order to allow us to implement activities that would make alignment, and it will make sense to integrate while we trying to reach the goals that we want to have the financial sector more integrated with green finance activities. For that, the roadmap adds four main pillars, I would say, which is the first one is awareness. We think it's important to create this awareness among both public and private entities on why this is important to integrate green finance in the financial normal financial sector activities. Then the second one, it's more on capacity. And going straight to your question, yes, we see the capacity as a challenge in most financial institutions. What we are planning to do is actually provide capacity opportunities, training for both, again, private and public sector. Another angle which is very important is policy and regulation. We also thought that this angle can provide more opportunities. The change the requirement at this level are also important to align and to allow financial institutions to start looking at this particular opportunity and segment around this target group that we are trying to focus on. And linked to that, innovation is key. Innovation is key. So we also see the potential to leverage digital finance to these vulnerable groups and find the ways that we can also align and find ways to provide service which will mitigate or create resilience for them in terms of these economic shocks and in their activities. So we are planning interventions around macro, meso, and micro level. In micro level, we did also support the piloting and now more kind of scale up of the parametric insurance. More focus, as I said, on agriculture was one of the sectors most affected by these cyclones, and we did support the parametric insurance, which is clearly a way that people can try to at least recover for their livelihood, and they can keep their activities somehow moving on. So in addition to that, we do have another intervention mainly focused on with the financial sector, trying to create developing financial tools, especially on the ways like develop a market for green bonds, develop opportunities to create another sources of funds, because we do believe also the financial sector can not only mobilize resources, but can also come with the solutions that will solve particularly this problem. For that, we are trying to create this awareness, create capacity, and create opportunities to have legislation around, align it, and then we expect to facilitate their interventions in terms of private and public sector in terms of innovation. So these are mainly what we have been doing as a micro facilitator. As you know, we are not service providers as such. So what we do is mainly facilitate the market into the directions that we believe are the ones aligned with this particular segment and creating resilience to this segment. So one thing it is also important is we have been trying to support also the tools around risk mitigation in order to create some preparedness for these situations, mainly in these main target groups, the ones that are the most affected by this catastrophic situation. So this is mainly what we have been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Benedito. It's great to hear that there's a lot going on. I've seen that there's a couple of very good questions already, but I just want to come back to Mikkel, because I know that, as you said, this is not something that you've actively been working on, but I'm interested in your take as to what you see from your work in financial inclusion for refugees and forcibly displaced people. You know, what would you like to see the financial sector do better? And how do you see financial products helping these populations in managing the response to climate change?
Yeah, well, there is indeed a big potential role to play for the full financial ecosystem, as colleagues have mentioned here, really to prepare, to adapt, to prevent, and respond to climate-related displacement. So I will start from a high level. There is a huge need for large-scale public and private investments, first of all, in fragile settings. So from planning urban development, so that people avoid keeping settling in high-risk areas, in building seawalls and other flood defenses. Sustainable shelters is huge among displacement community. Also climate resilience agricultural technique, which can increase food securities and so decrease the need for migration. I know that you don't want to speak, but this panel is not about the smallholder farmers, but we know that climate finance covers only a small fraction of the total needs of small scale farmers and agribusinesses. And we know that these people, the fishers, the herders in developing countries are the most vulnerable to climate change and the least able to cope with the impact, as they already lack the resilience, the safety nets to protect them against repeated shock. What we know is that climate finance for these people is mostly sourced from the public sector. I think like something like 95%. And this is probably due to a lack of attractive pipelines of projects to invest in small scale agriculture from the private sector. And so here, as we often speak about the role of blended finance, also here I would like to say that public resources have the potential to de-risk investments in agricultural development and so to catalyze more funding from the private sector. It's also very important, and this was also mentioned in the panel, to invest in local communities. We have seen that a lot at UNHCR. Really scaling up climate adaptation finance for local organizations, support the important work of the local communities because they know their place best, and there are a number of success stories actually of refugees and hosts working together to address climate-related risk, for example, on reforestation. I would like to also mention microfinance, which has always an important role to play with loans to make advanced purchases of agricultural inputs, purchasing on simple irrigation equipment. So we heard about the importance of insurance and these fascinating developments. I would also like to mention remittances, which is another key product linked to migration that can contribute positively to local economies. And there are a number of studies that actually show the positive role of remittances in preparing households against natural disasters and in coping with the loss that they experience after. And so people receiving remittances can, of course, rely more on cash, and if they have more cash reserves, then they are less prone to sell assets or livestock. But in order to target forcibly displaced population with all these financial interventions, first of all, financial institutions need to consider these people as a possible target. And this is actually a huge underlying issue. Financial institutions, the majority of them still don't see internally displaced and especially refugees as a potential market segment. For a variety of reasons, there are administrative reasons, bureaucratic reasons that should best be addressed with solutions like what Carlos was suggesting. You know, ID is huge, like the fact of not recognizing ID, but actually, even when like the refugee ID or another document is recognized by the local authorities, still there is an issue of really lack of awareness of the legal rights and the socioeconomic profiles of refugees. And so simply financial institutions don't see these people as a possible target market. And these, of course, creates a lot of challenge because they prevent displaced population from accessing financial services, from also obtaining sustainable livelihoods, perpetuates the cycle of poverty, and so on. So just to conclude, it's really important to be able to understand all these linkages, and I think there is a lot of room for action, as we've heard today, to work more closely together and understand these linkages and finding solutions.
Thank you very much, Mikkel. I'm aware we only have 5 minutes left, but I've seen we've got a couple of great questions. So maybe I'll just start with the first one and see how quickly we can do that. I think this probably, we should start with Bijal on this. And this is from Sadia Siddiqui in Karachi. What can Pakistan learn from, say, Ahmedabad's experiences, especially a megacity like Karachi, which experiences urban heat, island effect, and heat waves yearly and multiple times a year, and now urban flooding? When megacities run on the informal economy, how can financial inclusion play a role in all of this?
Yeah, so, our conditions actually are very, very similar. And of course, you will have many home-based women workers in Pakistan. So what we did is we actually thought largely in terms of building resilience. So finance was not the only intervention that we did. As I said, first we started with a lot of education and training around what is climate change, used some training kits to help them assess their vulnerabilities around heat, around flooding, help them make their action plans. So the action plans would include probably things like savings or adopting technologies and then using finances for it. So the next step would be, in fact, what we call disruptive collaborations between us and the technologists. So in a certain cool roof technology, for example, which we piloted, there were corrugations like there are in tin sheets and AC sheets, which are very common to the shanties in Global South. And he installed a cool roof, and it was very aspirational, glamorous, and women understood by taking the temperature that it's really cooling their environments. But then they came back telling the technologists that they wanted to use it like a flat terrace where they could climb on top and sleep during the summer months. And so the technologists then went back and, sort of redid the technology to flatten the corrugation. So those kind of disruptive collaborations that we did, and then women later on took loans for these kind of roofs. So we came till there. And finally, what we did is we actually set up multi-stakeholder groups with the government. So basically these women sitting at the same table and talking to the government on, and the action plans were actually co-developed with the local city. For example, during the monsoons, we had a 24-hour flood control room, which was initiated and which was working. And the women had, planned their actions with the flood control room. And everyone's responsibility was fixed. And we do hope that because of our, relationship with the government, and the women themselves with a built capacity to talk to the government, we will be able to continue this over a period of time and ensure that these kind of co-creation of plans and actions will, work. It has till now, and I'm quite hopeful going ahead. So I think, given the fact that we have similar conditions, except, the gender inclusion may need much more investment in Pakistan. Probably, I think it will work.
Thank you, Bijal. That's great. I wish we could have longer to talk about this, but I'm afraid that we don't. So I just want to thank all four of you, Benedita, Bijal, Mikkel, and Carlos. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you all for joining. Anyone who's more interested, I think my colleagues can drop some links into the chat now about our work in this. But thank you all for joining. I hope that you've learned something that's expanded your concept of green inclusive finance, and we'd love to carry the conversation on. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.